Hey YouTubers and vinyl community, I'm back with a video on vinyl. It's been a really long time since I did a vinyl pickup video, and I have to admit I've slowed down a little bit, but that's not because I haven't been listening. It's really because I tend to listen to the same stuff over and over again. I'm happy doing that. Can't really explain it, but that's the fact. So I get by without a whole lot of new purchases. And honestly, some of the stuff that I've bought here, I might have only listened to one side of it because I go back to listening to the stuff that I'm in the mode of listening to. So I haven't gotten deep in some of this stuff. So without further ado, let's dig into it. I went on a buying spree the last time I was at a physical record store and bought myself some stuff I'd been wanting for a while. So I spent the big bucks and got the MoFi releases of a few Elvis Costello albums. Now I'm very familiar with this music. I mean, I listened to this stuff. I had the original pressings back in the day when it was released. Don't listen to it a lot these days. It was just one of those things where, the vinyl I have of Elvis Costello is from those days and it's pretty beat up from crappy turntables and so forth. So Get Happy was one of my very favorite records of his, and I still like it a lot. I've only played the first two sides though of this pressing, and it does sound really good. So glad to have this. I'll eventually put it on. I'll get in one of those moods where I want to hear it, and I'll put this on and go all the way through it at some point. By the way, this is a double. If you didn't know it, they crammed a lot of music onto one LP back in the day. I think my memory's right on that. This is actually a double, so it's kind of got a normal amount of songs per side, and that also helps with fidelity. Armed Forces. It's got the European cover and the American cover on it. Another MoFi release. Also one of my favorite records of all time. And I got it for the same reason I got Get Happy. I just wanted a pristine, clean copy of it. And again, I believe I've listened to side one of this. And sounds good. Another one I treated myself to, Almost Blue. Had never heard this before. I toyed with buying this a lot in the old days when it was released, and never went through with it. So while I was on this binge, I went ahead and got this copy, and I've listened to side one of it. And actually I like it a lot. I don't love the first tune. It's just too, if I recall correctly, it hits you too hard right out of the gate. But some of the other tunes I liked a lot. Eventually I'll get back to listening to this one all the way through. This is another one of my favorites of Elvis's, and this was, to me, sort of a changing point in his career. This album sounds very different to anything that came before it. And I liked it the first moment I heard it back in the old days. I still have my original pressing. Wanted to try it on MoFi, and I played it the other night, and it does sound great. I played side one as usual. I only listen really kind of late at night or when I have a half hour or so. So that's one thing I do like about vinyl is you can just play a side, and you know that it was designed to have that side be cohesive. So that's what I'll do. I'll oftentimes just listen to one side of a given record and then put it away. So glad to have this one. Another favorite of mine over the years has been Keith Jarrett, and I picked up a bunch of Keith Jarrett stuff. Keith Jarrett, New Dance. Been looking for this one for a while, ended up getting it off of eBay. It's in pretty good shape. I like the first side of this a lot. I did get through this is a double album. I got through the second and third sides. I'm not sure about the second and third side yet, and I don't know what the fourth has to hold for me. I'm not hardcore into his free jazz or the stuff that leans toward free jazz. I'll kind of wade through it in order to get to the next thing. And sides 2 and 3 of this, my impression, I've only listened to it once, but I'm holding up 2 fingers, once, was that those 2 sides were not keeping my attention very well. But I'll get back through it. Still glad to have it. It's basically, that's one thing I guess I am kind of a collector of, is I guess I got to admit I'm sort of a Keith Jarrett collector. This is another Keith Jarrett, Changes. Now this one I love. I love this record. I would say that his favorite, or I would say that my favorite of his up to this point is probably My Song. That's one I can go to. I must have played it 1,000 times and I can just always listen to it. This one might have that status for me, where it might even replace My Song. I really, really dig this album a lot. It's very melodic. I believe that it's all improvised. And I think it was also the first time the trio got together. It's the American Trio. So it's got Jack DeJohnette, my favorite drummer, and Gary Peacock on bass. And I've got a bunch of the Standards albums. As a matter of fact, there's one here. Let me stick with Keith for a second. As I just said, another Standards trio, Keith Jarrett and Jack DeJohnette, and Gary Peacock. This is a really good album. The sound on this is really great. So I've listened to this one a whole lot. Somehow it sounds better in my headphones than it does on the speakers, but it sounds good either way. The cymbals in particular, like a lot of ECM albums, but the cymbals in particular are delicious. So I would highly recommend this record if you're into Standards and if you're into a 3-piece band. Okay, so this one was a surprise from my wife. It was kind of a late birthday present. I had mentioned in some context that, you know, I liked listening to The Stranger when I was in high school. My mom had the copy and I would borrow it from her. And I just can't find a good copy of it, or a copy at all. And magically, a couple of weeks later, this appeared. And it's an audiophile pressing, half-speed mastered. It seems to be a CBS pressing. Interesting thing about this, we put this on and listened to it together. And I just turned on my stereo, and those of you that have watched my more recent stereo reviews have seen that I have a lot of tubes in my system. So anyway, we sit down, and the system didn't have long to warm up, let's say 10 minutes. And we put it on, and the first tune is The Stranger, and it just sounded flat, lifeless, gross. It sounded like it was in mono. And my wife said, I knew we got ripped off. And I was like, we didn't get ripped off. It's just, you know, my memory of this album is different than the reality of it. Whatever. But let's listen anyway. So we kept listening. And about the 3rd song in, it started sounding nicer, and there started being more stereo separation. And to use an audiophile term, it seemed like the sound was blooming. It was opening up and coming out into the room and warming up and all of that. So I have to assume, and my wife heard this too, that the warm-up on my set of components must be pretty darn important. And I had always assumed you got to warm stuff up a little bit with tubes, but I figured 10 minutes is enough, you know. But you know, I think it had a lot to do with the sound of this record, and so from now on I'm going to warm the system up for at least half an hour before I sit down and really listen hard to something. Anyway, I'm super happy to have this, and it was awesome of my wife to think of it and find it. I think she got it off Amazon. One more, Van Morrison's Astral Weeks, which is, you know, one of those recordings, you got to have this. It's really good. As I understand it, this record, Van Morrison kind of planned it out, but didn't tell the musicians very much about it. And they kind of got in a room and started recording it. And it has a very intimate sound where you do feel like you're kind of in this room. If you close your eyes, you can imagine just a bunch of musicians kind of sitting around and working these tunes out. So it's a little looser than, say, Moondance. But I really like that about it. And this is a nice pressing. This is a more recent, it's an RTI, 180 gram. Sounds really good. So that covers it for the vinyl I've purchased since my last video. So I hope you saw something of interest in there. If you have any questions about this stuff, feel free to comment below, and I will catch you later.